Ah, So good evening, everyone in the room and online. It's so nice to have you together tonight. And my name is James. I am a teacher here at Inside LA, and I also sit on the board of directors. And it's a pleasure to be here. I love Wednesday nights and the opportunity to be here, to be in community, to do a little studying. So tonight, what we'll do is we'll open with a sitting practice. We'll sit for about a half an hour, mostly in silence, lightly guided. And then there'll be a break, uh, bio break, grab a little drink or a little food. It'll be short. And then come back in. And then tonight, we're going to talk about the very first teaching that the Buddha ever offered and why the Buddha offered it. So that will be after the break. And I'm going to keep myself to about 20 minutes. Um, and then we'll break out in groups. And I have a question for you about what the topic is. And I'll give you a chance to talk about it with each other about what you think. And then with the remaining time, there's time for those of you who are here. There's some food out there. Please help yourself. There's also the makings of tea. And at any point along the way, if you feel the need to get up, if you're in the room and take care of yourself, please do. Please do. Okay. And online, if there's anything that comes up, give me a high sign and let me know. If the sound goes down, my voice goes down, sometimes it does that. If there are any other glitches. And we have Teddy helping us tonight at the sound booth. And so we will take the best care of you we can. So to start with then, welcome yourself to this moment. This moment as opposed to any other. It's making a choice to be present. And that is a choice. So inviting you to make that choice. And as you make that choice, inviting you to also remember something you might have forgotten, and that's that you have a body. You've been wandering around in it all day, but you might not have noticed. And now's a good time to reconnect with your body. Gently, kindly making contact. It's always good to make contact with the body because the body only lives in this moment. The body, in fact, doesn't know how to live in the past or the future. It only knows how to live now. So it can be your guide, gently, kindly coming into the body. And this body is made up of the elements of the earth. The first one being earth itself. And if we look into the body for reminders of the earth, we look for places where there's hardness like bone or firmness like muscle, tendon, fingernails, other tissue. So inviting you to just gently scan through lightly and see where there's things that remind you of this earth element in your body. And of course, if you only had that one element, your body would be rigid and hard like a rock. But instead, there's water. And water allows for cohesion. It also allows the body to be alive and not frozen in place like a rock. And just as the earth is 2/3 water, so is your body. And so noticing places in the body where there's water, moisture in the eyes, saliva, the skin, muscles, your digestion. the blood in your veins, all water. And of course, with just these hard elements of the earth and water, you'd be very vulnerable to temperature. But fortunately, you have fire, the fire of the earth. And you can easily notice that in the temperature of your body, although it varies. Some places are warmer, some places are cooler. Just noticing what you feel and the difference in the body. Where is it warmer? Where is it cooler? And also noticing digestion, that miraculous way the body has of taking in food and changing it into energy, fire itself. Some would say it's even the source of your passion. And then lastly, of course, there's wind, air, this most fleeting of elements, and yet the most important. We can't live long at all without it, only minutes. And every cell in the body contains this air, this oxygen. It also provides the body with the ability to move. And acknowledging these elements of earth, water, fire, and air in the body and the connection to the earth, the interdependence with the earth. Perhaps that offers a sense of grounding, of connection in this moment. And perhaps for you, air, the breath, serves as an anchor, a place to call home when you sit and meditate. So, inviting you to bring awareness directly to the breath. For you, that might be the nose, the throat, the tummy. Maybe for you, it's a whole body experience. Wherever it's most accessible for you, inviting you to bring your attention there. Of course, any other anchors are equally effective if you'd like to use them. Sound, sensation. Just bringing this light awareness to the breath. And if you'd like to be more intimate with the breath, inviting you to notice the inflow and the outflow. And allowing this mindfulness of the breath to be front and center. And perhaps the mind has decided to offer you some interesting thoughts or a story or some other experience. And that's completely normal. That's the mind doing what it does best. So just smiling at that, maybe even a little gratitude. Mind works awfully hard. And also, if you'd like just to say, not now, not now, and gently returning, bringing awareness back home to the breath. Perhaps it's been a long day and you're feeling a bit tired. And your body's taking this cue to slow down, way down. Sometimes it's helpful to bring just a bit more attention to the breath, noticing how different this breath is from the last or the next. Noticing how each breath is completely unique. And perhaps in this moment, you're finding yourself wishing something were different. Maybe you should have sat in that chair. Maybe you should be on a cushion. Maybe more of this, less of that. Is it possible in this moment to let some of that go? Is it possible to allow yourself to be a little bit more in this moment, just as it is? As a wise teacher once said, right now, it's just like this. And in just a moment, you'll hear the sound of the bell, bringing this meditation to a close. Hmm. Hmm. Thank you for your practice. That was very sweet. I'm feeling in the room. Much appreciated. So before we go on to break, I'd like to give you a chance to fully be present in the room. At some point, if you're around Buddhism and you're studying the Dharma, you're going to hear about the Four Noble Truths. And first, let's break down the word noble for a second, because that, for some people, seems like it's out of place because we often think of noble in relation to status. And in this case, noble actually means ennobling in a sense. So studying these truths ennobles you in your journey, raises you up in your journey, in your understanding of the reality of life. So that's kind of the way to think about four noble truths in this case. And just to try that on and see what you think. But the basic idea of these four core teachings of Buddhism are that these truths are the core of practice. And they are that there is suffering in the world. And suffering in the suttas is called dukkha. And dukkha actually is a really broad term. In the original writings, it talks about a square axle in a wagon wheel in a round hole. And it talks about the irritation that you would have and what it would be like to ride in a wagon where there was a square axle and a round wheel. Not that much fun, right? So, but dukkha covers a lot of things, and we tend to think of it as just suffering, major suffering, but it actually encompasses all of it. And then that's the first truth, is there's suffering. The second is that there's a cause for suffering, primarily craving and clinging are the cause to that. And then the third truth is that there's a cessation, an end of suffering that is possible. And the fourth truth is the Eightfold Path, which is the path to the end of suffering. So well, let's break all this down in an easy way. First of all, how did this all come about? Um, Once upon a time, there was a seeker. The seeker was a prince and lived a life of extraordinary privilege, a life designed by purpose, that he would have no difficulties, that he would know only pleasure, he would know only privilege, that he would not be exposed to suffering in any way. And as he became an adult, living this life of privilege, he became curious. He became curious about what life was like outside the walls of the palaces that his family lived in. And he ventured forth. And when he ventured forth, there were four things he saw. The first thing he saw was someone who was struggling with old age and walking with a cane. And the next time he went out, he saw a sick person who was enduring a lot of pain with their illness. He'd never seen either of these things before. In his days in the palace, this had all been hidden from him. And then the third time he went out, he actually saw a corpse being carried in a funeral. And he had never been exposed to death. So this also attracted his attention. And then in the last time out, he met a spiritual seeker. And he also hadn't been exposed to that. So in his reflecting on these experiences, he decided he wanted to live differently. And he wanted to understand more about what he'd seen. So he left the palaces and he went on his own journey. And having come from this life of luxury, of indulgence, of privilege, he decided to follow the people who were teaching about giving that all up, who sometimes were referred to as ascetics. So he went into a life where at one point he was surviving on 1 grain of rice a day, and very nearly died along the way. And yet he did not find his answer. He didn't understand what he saw. So he remembered that in his childhood, at one point, he had been out on one of the family's many farms and he sat under a tree. And he remembered that when he sat under the tree, he had a feeling of immense calm come over him. And he decided to do that again. So he sat under the Bodhi tree and decided he would sit there until he understood what he was seeking. And then when he did, he decided to teach about it. And the very first thing he taught were these 4 noble truths. Why? Why were these the first things that he turned to and the first things that he taught? That's the part that's interesting. So I think in my own studies, I heard these and I I was like, well, why is so significant about this? You know, there's suffering in the world. Well, yeah, hello. Yes, this is not a surprise, right? I mean, there were plenty of examples of that I knew. So it was like, okay, I get that. And there's this way that suffering can be made worse. And there's and that has to do with craving and clinging. And it's like, oh, I think I'll come back to that because that sounds complicated. And then the third one, which is that there's this way for suffering to stop. And that just mystified me. I didn't understand that at all. And then this fourth, which is the Eightfold Path, which is this path of study. So, and of course, I missed the point. I missed the point. And over the years, what I've discovered is that this journey is about understanding the nature of suffering and how you are in relationship with that suffering and how powerful that is as a teaching. It's the suffering that actually causes dissatisfaction. And this suffering, this dukkha, comes in many ways. One of the ways is things that we all are familiar with that cause pain, that we all know. They're called, sometimes referred to as the 8 worldly winds: gain and loss, status and disgrace, praise and blame, they're opposites, pleasure and pain. These things are inevitable in life. They're going to happen. We're all going to experience them. And at one point in the teachings, it refers to 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. I often feel maybe a little out of balance there, but leaning in one direction, not paying attention to the other. But these things will always happen. They will always be present. There's also suffering that comes about from struggling with the idea of impermanence. And this is where we find ourselves wanting to hang on to things. Like tonight, I think was probably a really beautiful sunset. And if I'd been outside watching it, I wouldn't have wanted it to stop. I wouldn't have wanted it to go away. And yet it did. And me wanting to maintain my relationship with that experience is an example of this suffering from impermanence, wanting the moment to continue, wanting a really good meal to keep going, wanting that taste to continue. Those are things that are where beautiful moments, beautiful experiences become nothing more than a memory. They don't last. And then the third type of suffering to acknowledge is what we call conditioned existence. And this is coming to understand that we exist in this moment based on the conditions that have occurred all of our lives. So to bring us into this room in this moment, there are hundreds and thousands of conditions, each in all of our lives, that brought us together. And it's interdependent. We don't understand the causes. We can't possibly understand the causes. I can understand part of my causes. I don't know yours. I don't know yours. I don't know what conditions brought you here. Um, and these things are all the things we travel with in our lives. It's an undercurrent of perhaps worry or fear or dissatisfaction that travels with us in our daily lives. It's this sense, even though that things are there, that they could go away, even though things seem fine, that they could go away. So, looking at a relationship to these facets of suffering is really the key, actually, to the liberation that the Dharma talks about. So, for me, that really started with this idea that I was resisting looking at and being with suffering. And um, what that resulted in being in this position where I kept resisting it and pushing it away. And as the saying goes, what you resist persists. And so the suffering would remain unexplored, unchanged, and it will just continue because my relationship was to keep it at bay. And I had many creative ways over time that I would try to keep the suffering at bay, but none of them ever really worked. Um, and also a realization that um, even in happy moments, there's a seed of suffering because we know that these happy moments don't last. And because of that, I think a lot of people, including me, we try to connect happy moments together. We try to line them up. A good day's work, an easy drive home, a nice workout at the gym, a great meal, a lovely evening with the dogs, maybe really terrific intimacy with your partner. Connection, connection, connection. Trying to stay in happiness, trying to chase this idea of that. When we stop and when we actually change our relationship to suffering to be able to see it more clearly, then things begin to shift and change. And we begin to see this thread of dukkha and suffering that runs through our lives. And we realize it's not just our lives, my life, your life, it's all of our lives. And this is where shift happens that's extraordinarily important and easy to miss. And that is we begin to understand the human experience. We understand that each person's life looks like this. We understand that each person's life has this element of whatever variety of dukkha there is, we all have it. And when we come into contact with that and we understand that this is actually the essence of human experience, another door opens, a very, very important door. And that door is called compassion. And so the essence of this process of changing your relationship and understanding the truth of suffering brings you into a sense of understanding the essence of other people's worlds and lives and opens the door to your heart for compassion. And this is part that you don't want to miss. This is the part from learning about suffering that is really crucial for us. The temptation is always to push and pull, push and pull. Um, you know, I mentioned in the meditation at one point, I said, there may be things going on right now. Maybe you wish you sat in a chair. Maybe you wish you sat on a cushion. You know, maybe right now your knee hurts. Maybe right now your shoulder hurts. And in this moment, you want it to be different than it is. If we stay in relationship to our experience, wanting it to be different than it is, then it doesn't allow us to come into this moment to see what truly is present for us. And when we miss this connection, what's truly present, then it keeps us from seeing this common experience. It keeps us from our own humanity and our own ability to open up in compassion. And one of the risky things about this is it leaves us in a position of reactivity. So with pushing and pulling, I'm big pulling, pushing can sometimes be like aversion, right? You don't want it around. So whatever experience it is that you don't want, whether it's being with people you don't want to be with, having an experience you don't want to have, bad news that you don't want to have, you're pushing it away. You're pushing it away. And pulling, in essence, in my experience, feels like when I get lost in the suffering. And when I get lost in the suffering, my first tendency is to blame, to find fault, to find cause, either in myself or others. And this is drowning in it. So that's pulling into it and then the pushing away. The problem with either one of those things in relationship to suffering is that when you're in those places, what kind of choices do you make? What kind of choices do you make when you're pushing away an experience or whether you're drowning in it? And that's why reactivity becomes so important. Those decisions are reactive decisions. They're decisions that are very much in the moment. And I don't even want to try to list all the reactive decisions that I've made in my life, or maybe even in this week, actually, or maybe even in this day, because I make a lot of them, because I still can do that very easily, get lost in that. Um, Understanding the nature of suffering moves me. It moves me and it allows me through this common humanity and this compassion to give up this idea of reactivity. And it allows me to empower myself into a deeper kind of human experience. And that experience is about response, not reactivity. It allows me to be present in a wise way. And so this understanding of suffering becomes the door to responding in the world rather than reacting to the world. And this is the importance of this first noble truth, is how we are with suffering and how this can be. Suffering is our teacher, not our enemy. It's our teacher. So then the second noble truth is this idea that craving drives this. And if in the meditation you were finding you wanted it to be different than it was, maybe you wanted more guidance, maybe you wanted less guidance. Maybe you'd rather sit with a female voice than a male voice. You know, maybe you wish it was this person or not that person. Any of those things that took place in that meditation, anything, discomfort in your body, those things, you were craving for it to be different, different than it was. And that sense of craving allows us to understand this mechanism that keeps perpetuating our own suffering. Because that craving keeps us in a state of desiring for things to be different than they actually are. And then that also involves clinging on to things. Both of these things actually are experiences based on not knowing and not understanding. Not understanding impermanence, not understanding the imperfect nature of the world, and also not understanding the nature of ourselves and the identities we carry, and that those are in flux and they change over time. But we want everything to be solid. We want it to stay one way, always, forever. And that won't happen. It can't happen. But we get lost in this. And this keeps us in that suffering, this clinging, this craving, and this not knowing keep us there. The third noble truth tells us that when craving and clinging let go, and when we realize the nature of our existence, that the suffering starts to lessen and at times maybe completely goes away. I remember sitting with my mentor teacher and talking about a meditation that I'd had and saying, I couldn't believe it. I sat there for like 10 minutes and I felt incredibly calm. I felt nothing, no stress at all. I was at peace. And he interrupted me and he said, yes, you found the third noble truth. The reason I use that example is because a lot of times embedded in this idea of the third noble truth is this promise of nirvana, is this idea that at some point, as we progress along this path, that we find nirvana. And nirvana is a pretty lofty concept for most people. And it's the end, the final end, the cessation of suffering. And I always thought that. I didn't think that it could come to me in bits and pieces along the way. But that's actually true. There's measures and parts and pieces of this liberation that we feel. And as we sit or as we go through life and we have those moments where craving and clinging go, and we are at peace with existence, we're at peace with this common humanity, we start to experience this peace of calmness. And this is a taste of nirvana. It does happen, and we can experience these tastes. So along the way, the prescription for how we get there is this Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path, just quickly as a reminder, if you have heard it before, and if not, is wise view, wise intention, wise speech, wise conduct, wise livelihood, wise effort, wise mindfulness, and wise concentration. And I choose wise instead of right in these to describe them because they're frequently described as right view, right intention. I like to think of it as opening the door to wisdom with each one of these steps and nurturing this ability to move through. They operate very much in connection with each other, and they're a beautiful journey. Each one of them is. They circle around different parts of the day, different parts of a week, a year, your life. You work on different pieces of them. But one crucial piece, and one piece that we worked on tonight, is mindfulness. And that piece, mindfulness and concentration, allows you to begin to see. And that's why it's so crucial and why there's so much emphasis on it in this tradition, that we look to mindfulness to allow us to come into a place where we begin to let things fade away. We begin to see thoughts start to abate, not go away completely. That won't ever happen. We don't actually want that to happen. But we're able to be with what's true in the moment and start to see clearly what experience is. And that's why mindfulness is so crucial in this process. So my question for you is, the Buddha was a seeker. Are you? Are you a seeker? Would you like to know the answers? Would you like to learn more about what the reality of this experience is? And if you do, to invite you on this journey.